Hey everybody, welcome back to Leosophy. I got 3 questions today, and I'm going to try and keep things shorter this time, so let's jump right in that way instead of me going on a long-winded rant. Let me pull up the questions. Here we go. Okay. Did dinosaurs have feathers? That's a really fun question because people who I'm not a huge dinosaur person, but the people who are, they seem to be really passionate about one side or the other. I mean, you've got people who argue on one end that dinosaurs were basically just gigantic parakeets, and then on the other hand, you've got people who argue that they had that more classic, like the claymation dinosaur that fought King Kong kind of look. And there seems to be a huge emotional investment in that, one side or the other. It almost seems like nostalgia versus, I don't know, some sort of highly imagined people who really like birds, I guess. And it's not that cut and dry. Dinosaur is a very broad term. It's not like when we talk about a lot of things with modern taxonomy. If you're talking about turtles and tortoises, or bony fish, or what have you, it's very narrow. And dinosaur is just a huge umbrella of a term. So, did they have feathers? The Both sides dislike this claim, but the middle of the argument is actually the most accurate. Some did and some didn't. If I had to make an educated guess, I would say that more didn't than did, uh, because you can actually see sort of evolutionary intersections today, of sort of that middle path between mammals and birds, which is in many respects what dinosaurs did seem to have in common with one another, as broad as the term is. And I can't think of a better example. People tend to think of them as just gigantic lizards, but crocodilians, alligators, crocodiles, caiman, gharials or gharials, I'm not sure how you pronounce that one for sure, they're all, they have more in common with dinosaurs than they do with snakes and lizards in many respects. They're kind of the intersection. Like if you imagine, I've mentioned before that life kind of branches out like a tree does. If you think about the node between two branches, that gap between two branches, crocodilians are sort of between reptiles and birds. In fact, they're one of the reasons why some scientists claim that reptiles and birds are the same thing, which leads to some really confusing descriptions in the literature. It's actually kind of annoying. It's like stereo instructions. All birds, including lizards, have so many chambers in their heart. All birds, excluding lizards, it'll say things like that in parentheses, and it's super confusing. But yeah, crocodilians, for example, they've got a lot in common with modern birds. Just look at how they rear their young. They produce large amounts of oxytocin whenever they hear their young hatching, and then they take care of them. It's more avian-like behavior. So dinosaurs had that in common. They probably reared their young. Several of the species, I would say at least a quarter of the species, had feathers. And then, of course, there's the argument, a lot of people think that they were homeotherms like us and like birds. Um, I'm a little skeptical of that because during the period when they were at their highest presence, the climate of Earth was a lot more humid and a lot more hot. And the chief argument, and by the way, I think both sides have good points. I'm not actually taking one huge side over another like hard line. I'm closer to the fence than I would like to admit under normal circumstances. But I'm more inclined to think they were poikilothermic because the argument has been, well, something of that size, how could it warm up enough? Well, my argument to that is, if they were homeotherms, something of that size, how would it stay fed? Because its metabolism would be much higher. And again, if you look at modern equivalents, Florida is hot and humid and warm. It is. It's the seasons are generally really mild there. But you get 100-foot alligators sometimes, and what kills them? It's not that they can't get warm enough. They're fine about elevating their temperature by basking in the sun. They usually starve when they get to a certain age because they can't get enough calories. Well, then take that and apply it to dinosaurs during an even warmer period. You'd think that their biggest obstacle would be getting enough calories, not warming up enough. So yeah, I think they were almost certainly poikilothermic, and I'd say most of them probably didn't have feathers. Um, yeah, I haven't looked over the fossils that much. Again, I'm not as a really enthusiastic studier of dinosaurs, but I'm more inclined to think that the people who, even though it's probably largely for emotional reasons, the nostalgic types, I think they're actually probably closer to the truth. They were more reptilian than avian in nature, even though they absolutely did bridge that cusp. They were certainly more avian than, say, modern reptiles. Let's see, which, that makes sense because that's how life works. Life branches out. So of course, the further back you go, the closer things are going to be to the in between of two now distant species, families, orders, etc. Let's see. Next question. I hope that answers that one decently. It's not a very cut and dry thing. God, they're all like complicated today. This one, the other ones were so black and white. What is gravity? Complicated question again. What we know for certain is that gravity is the force that keeps things on a surface. And that's, a very broad term. If you think about it, it's a really um, strange phenomenon. It's simultaneously a force strong enough to keep all objects equally, regardless of weight and mass, tethered to the ground. And yet at the same time, it's weak enough that even really tiny creatures can sort of break free of it. When you watch a small animal fly around, they're effectively fighting gravity. So, yeah, it's a strange force. The more modern view of it has to do with Einstein's relativity, where instead of it actually being a force, it's actually more like a consequence of just a physical reality. That being that the more mass something has, the more it exerts an influence on space-time. Space-time being all four dimensions at once. So, longitude, latitude, altitude, time, all at once, which is why it's called space-time. So, like, for example, let's instead of me fixating on things on Earth, let's look at the sun. Sun's massive, obviously. It's very big in relation to everything else that we tend to look at. I mean, it's small compared to a lot of stars, but when we think about, thinking about the sizes of things, we tend to think of ourselves, and then we tend to think of things that are smaller than us, and then we tend to think of things that are bigger than us. Mountains and lakes, and then the planet, and then other planets, and then finally the sun. The sun is just massive. Well, all that mass, according to relativity, puts sort of a dent in space-time. So imagine like an object, and then it's denting reality. It's denting space-time. And so that sort of causes other things to be pulled in, which is where all the planets' orbits come from. They're actually being pulled down by this. Like imagine an apple on a fabric. It would lower that fabric. It would make a dent, and then other objects around it. If you were to take some marbles, for example, they would be pulled towards it, and then they would start to circle it the way water circles the drain in a sink, which is also gravity. You can actually watch that right now if you wanted to. So that's what causes the orbit of the planets. And then in turn, those planets being massive, they create little dents as well, even though they're moving through space-time. You can see that. Well, so is the sun, just at a much slower rate. That's, you watch the spiraling of all the stars in the galaxy. So they exert mass, and then that in turn pulls in smaller bodies, like the moons that orbit most of those planets, and then any object that happens to be on said planet is going to be tethered to it by gravity, which also is influenced by the fact that those planets are rotating. And you can see that with, say, the graviton rides that you see at all the little circuses that come to town and carnivals. And so effectively, the force itself that tethers things to the ground, by modern reckoning, is a product of the fact that the more massive an object is, the more of an influence it exerts on space-time, which in turn causes things to be drawn towards that object by things of smaller mass. Hope that answers the question. Yeah, it's a complicated one, and again, what I'm talking about is a more modern view of things. For a very long time, gravity was just sort of taken for granted as a force, and then it was truly analyzed uh, by, shoot, who's the fellow who got hit with the apple according to urban legend? I cannot think of his name. That is crazy that I cannot think of his name. That is ridiculous. It's right on the tip of my tongue. Isaac Newton, Sir Isaac Newton. Cannot believe I couldn't think of that. And so then it was seen as a force for that period of time, and then Einstein sort of changed the game, talking about it being a consequence of mass in space-time. I hope that answers it. Anyway, I'll move on to the next question. Man, it's already 11 minutes. Dios mio. Last question, though, so this shouldn't be too long a video, thankfully. Are humans omnivore? Oh, okay. I mentioned in, I think it was the pain vid, that I said humans are herbivorous, and that's okay. It's what I said was sort of a fast generalization, but oh man, yeah, humans are weird in this sense. We're okay. Let me try and start from a more simple beginning. When I said that humans evolved from herbivores, I mean physiologically we have more in common with herbivores than we do with omnivores and carnivores. Physiologically, please do not take that to such an extreme degree that I'm advocating veganism. And vegans, please do not get super butthurt later on when I start making claims to the contrary. But I'm just trying to be objective here. Humans evolved from primates, and primates are, for the most part, omnivorous. Many of them are insectivorous, many of them are purely herbivorous. There's a diverse range of diets among primates. But if you look at our closest relatives, the apes, the great apes in particular, they are mostly, that's a big important term, mostly, I mean, if you wanted to really look at it, you would say that they're omnivorous, but they're really herbivores who sometimes supplement their diet. And I know some people might get offended by that notion and say, well, that would make them omnivorous. Well, even some of the most hardline herbivores will sometimes supplement their diet. Deer, for example. Nobody would ever claim that a deer was an omnivore, like a raccoon. But sometimes a deer will eat a baby bird that's born in a field to supplement their diet. They'll get calcium and other things from those animals. They will supplement their diet sometimes. To say something is 100% strictly herbivorous or carnivorous is a huge stretch. But, you know, it's more like a spectrum in that sense. Like dogs. Dogs are carnivorous. If you look at a dog's physiology, it's a carnivore. Sometimes if a dog's having stomach problems, it'll eat grass. Does that make it all of a sudden an omnivore? No. It's just supplementing its diet by a very small amount, very small margin. Similarly, if you look at most great apes, they're herbivores, and they sometimes go on hunting excursions as a group, and they'll supplement their diet with meat. Well, let's look at their physiology. They actually, you know what? Let's go the opposite way first. Let's look at carnivore, omnivore, herbivore teeth. And intestines. Those are the two big factors. Oh, and stomachs. Most herbivores, for example, they have 100% flat teeth. They have grinding and bisecting teeth. So in other words, if you look at a cow, for example, they'll have lower flat teeth. They'll have molars in the back that are massive, top and bottom. And they have complicated stomachs that ferment their food. And then they have very long intestines. Very long intestines. Now, the stomachs vary among herbivores, but the intestines are always very long to glean as much nutrients out of plant material as possible, and the teeth are always flat. Whether or not they have upper teeth or not, they tend to have very flat teeth that bisect the food first and then grind it in the back, the molar area. Then you look at omnivores and carnivores. Omnivores and carnivores, they have very, very sharp, piercing, tearing teeth in the front, and then they have something that sort of combines tearing and grinding in the very back. That's pretty much all omnivores and carnivores. The real difference there is that, generally speaking, if something is omnivorous, those grinding teeth in the back are going to be a little rounder and a little wider, so that they're more effective at sort of breaking apart different things. And then lastly, of course, carnivores, it's 100%. They've got massive canine teeth, massive incisors, which you can't see very good because of my mustache, and grinding teeth sort of in the back that are a combination, but for the most part, sharp teeth to pull the skin away and rip muscle fiber off the bone. That's very important. Now you look at our teeth. Well, they're almost expressly flat and grinding in the back, and they're flat in the front, and even our incisors are tiny. They're little. They're actually made, and this is 100% true. I've heard a lot of people argue against the herbivorous human claim because, well, we have canines. Yeah, but they're not really canine in nature. The purpose of them, and this is not disputable. This is a lot of research went into this, is to split roots. That's the purpose of the incisors. So, like, take for example a carrot. When you take a bite of a carrot, you use your bicuspids to split it down, and then once you're chewing on it, the incisors split it the other way, kind of the way a maul would split a log. That's the purpose of the incisors, is to break roots down. And then the molars, of course, are those grinding. So our teeth are largely herbivorous in nature. Just put yourself in the position of a lion. Do you think a person could rip and tear the skin and muscle fiber off of bones with their teeth and jaw muscles? It would be virtually impossible, and the amount of calories and time you would expend doing it would outweigh what you would get from the food itself. Yeah, that's why humans use tools to hunt and tools to clean the prey item, to cut the meat up, and then more tools by cooking it. You will never see humans chase, drag down, and then just devour raw a gazelle or something. And I've heard vegans make these arguments, and those are effective arguments. I'm not a vegan, but those are effective claims. And then lastly, or no, not even lastly, let's look at the stomach. Human stomach acid compared to a carnivore is very weak. Our stomach acid is on par with that of an herbivore. It's not made to just dissolve flesh really quickly. And yeah, it's more like an herbivore. Same thing with our palate, actually. We have very complicated and sensitive palates, which is why humans love a variety of different foods, of different textures, of different flavors, all these different profiles. Carnivores, not so much. They just sort of, look at a dog eat. They just sort of inhale the food. Carnivores have very few in the way of taste buds. They don't really glean a lot of pleasure out of the flavor of food. It's really more the actual act of eating and swallowing that they derive enjoyment from. And then we'll look at the intestines. Our intestines are very very long compared to a carnivore's. A carnivore's intestines are usually about 3 times the length of their body, and an herbivore's intestines are about 11, 12 times the length of their body. That's where ours fit in. We have very long intestines, which are made to glean the most out of plant material. So at this point, you're probably thinking, well, then you're making a pretty hardball argument in favor of humans being 100% herbivorous. Not really. Physiologically, yeah, we are absolutely herbivorous. We're built like gorillas, and gorillas are built to be herbivorous. And even if you actually look at chimpanzees and gorillas, they have massive incisors compared to us, largely for fighting each other, but then also to go on those hunting parties, because they don't cook their food, they don't clean their food with tools. But here's the thing, we do cook and clean our food with tools, and we have for a very long time. I'm talking about tens, hundreds of thousands of years, maybe longer. So that's long enough to say that it's a fundamental part of who we are, and it played an enormous role in our evolution. Cooking and eating meat is actually one of the reasons why we were able to supplement our diet and think as a group, think as a collective, and it influenced the evolution of our brains. That's not hyperbole. One of the reasons why the human brain is so complicated and advanced, and why our social behavior is so complicated and advanced. The foundation of society itself is based on organizing hunts and then also gaining extra calories from the food acquired from hunts. So yeah, just to say that well, yeah, a lot of our physiology is herbivorous in nature. It doesn't mean that we are inherently herbivorous culturally or genetically at this point. We are absolutely built to acquire meat. We are. You can see that through the history of humanity, as much as it is unfortunate or unpleasant, rather, to the argument to the contrary. And then also, if you look at some of the other things that we do, we were really meant, and I know people don't like this, but we were sort of built to get a lot of our meat in the form of arthropods. We were. Case in point, our pancreas breaks down chitin, which is the exoskeleton of arthropods. Particularly, I know a lot of people are thinking, oh, well, I could just eat lobsters whole then. Well, you could. You would absolutely break down most of those shells, probably be very unfortunate when the parts that you don't break down. But insects, the human diet historically, and I'm talking about prehistorically, has largely comprised of being supplemented by insects. That's really, I mean, yes, humans did go on hunting parties. It played a huge role in the evolution of our brains, but for the most part, I'd say, like, if you were to take, the paleo thing to its most literal interpretation, it would be less meat, like meat, and more fish and insects. That's where we would get the bulk of our meat nutrients from. In prehistoric times, they would have acquired a lot of insects. You can see this a lot with really ancient living peoples today, people whose societies haven't changed dramatically over tens, thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. There are people who are like that today, and they go into the jungle and they get grubs from tree bark. They collect large quantities of termites. There's actually a tribe in Africa. It looks gross and delicious at the same time. It's so weird. It's so polarizing to watch. But they gather a whole bunch of mosquitoes. Yeah, the things that normally are biting them. And they make these patties out of them. And it's so repulsive, and yet at the same time it looks kind of like hamburgers, because that's aesthetically what it kind of resembles. So yeah, the human diet, personally, I don't take an ethical issue with the consumption of meat itself. I do understand that there are alternatives now, and that I'm totally open to the fact that there are people who eat veggie burgers and portobello mushrooms and stuff now in lieu of meat. But again, both sides get mad when you point out the middle of this. But it's just the case. Physiologically, we have a lot more in common with herbivores than we do with omnivores and carnivores. But an increasingly omnivorous diet has played a vital role in modern man, and it's something that we've done before we were even just considered Homo sapiens, Homo erectus, and Homo neanderthalis, and a lot of the other members of our family tree. They absolutely went on hunting parties. They absolutely supplemented their diets with meat, especially in the colder regions, but even in tropical regions, and that's why you see it in virtually every culture. Yeah, so that's pretty much all I have to say about it. Is, yeah, the human diet, which we're so complicated that, I mean, what would you even really call the human diet? A person can survive to reproduce if they just ate flipping TV dinner pizza. We're pretty versatile like that. So yeah, we're built to consume a variety of things from a variety of sources. If you wanted to go as quote unquote natural as possible, though, pescatarianism with supplemental bugs, that would be the closest thing to natural. It wouldn't be a cheeseburger every other day. And I do think that in the Western diet, in America and in Europe and in South America, I think we do eat too much meat. I do. I don't think it's healthy, the sheer amount we eat. And yeah, I'm not one of those carnivore paleo types. Sorry. I think that it's good. I hear these arguments that their plant foods are toxic and they're trying to defend themselves. Yeah, they absolutely are. But we evolved alongside those defenses. We're part of that arms race with plants, and so we benefit from a lot of those compounds rather than suffer. And I understand, different people have different dietary issues. Be either for health reasons or for ethical reasons. But I think people get so swept up in what they want to eat for ethical or health reasons that then they start dictating what everybody else should. You know, I'm not offended by the fact that somebody would be vegan. I'm not offended by the fact that somebody would be a carnivore. What annoys me is when they try and sort of proselytize other people into, well, this is what you should eat. What I'm saying, for example, I'm saying it objectively. I'm not going to write a book called The Bug Diet and try and get people to do it. I don't eat crickets. I don't eat mealworms. I'm just saying that that's closer to what ancient man did eat. I like cheeseburgers. I like fish. If somebody held a gun to my head and told me to make a decision based on ethical grounds, I probably would lean towards pescatarianism because fish, as I've mentioned before, they don't have nociceptors, and unfortunately, overfishing is an issue. We'd really have to revamp aquaculture to make it more sustainable at this point in order for me to say, well, yeah, I would be 100% pescatarian. Because if the whole world was pescatarian, we probably wouldn't have fish for very long, the way things currently stand. So, yeah, I'm not opposed to any of those things. I'm opposed to the fundamentalist nature that a lot of people have with regard to their diet. But yeah, long story short, I'll summarize the answer. Physiologically, we have more in common with herbivores than we do with omnivores and carnivores, but an omnivorous diet has been a huge part of human existence for well, it is calculable. I just don't feel like calculating it. Period of time. So yeah, effectively, we are a very versatile animal and we can eat a number of things, and making the right dietary choices is really a personal matter. And there's a lot of research out there as to what you can do to, make yourself as healthy and long living as possible. Just don't fall into this, well, you should only eat elk steak raw, or, oh, well, you should only eat portobello mushrooms raw. No, no. Cooking, hunting, gathering, they're all good choices, to yeah, it's more subjective than people like to think that it is. Thanks. Hope you guys enjoy. Bye.